Coming up on the program, evacuations from Kabul airport pick up pace with over 82,300 evacuated since August 14. UNICEF warns 10 million Afghan children in desperate need. Plus, Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for deeper China-Russia cooperation against interference. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, says 10 million children in Afghanistan are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. The warning comes as the UN's World Food Programme seeks $200 million in food aid. According to UNICEF, Children in Afghanistan already survive on humanitarian assistance, and approximately 1 million are expected to suffer from life-threatening malnutrition this year. David Beasley, the executive director of WFP, says 14 million people, that's 1/3 of the Afghan population, face food insecurity because several years of drought, conflict, economic deterioration compounded by COVID. The World Bank has suspended aid to Afghanistan, freezing hundreds of millions in funding. It has provided $5.3 billion since 2002 and has 27 projects there. Last week, the IMF blocked the delivery of payments. New Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is in Washington, D.C. as the Prime Minister meets with U.S. President Joe Biden for the first time. According to reports, the Prime Minister plans to push for a new Iran strategy, saying he will urge U.S. President Joe Biden not to revive the 2015 nuclear deal with Tehran. Biden's aides hope the talks will set a positive tone for his relationship with Bennett, a far-right politician and high-tech millionaire who ended Benjamin Netanyahu's record 12-year run as prime minister in June. The meeting with President Joe Biden comes as tensions rise with its regional arch-enemy Iran and as Israel renews its bombardment of the besieged Gaza Strip amid Palestinian protests. Our Channels TV correspondent in Washington, D.C., Maria Bird, joins us now for more. Maria, this Israeli Prime Minister Bennett first state visit overseas. This is his first state visit overseas since taking office. What's on the agenda for this visit? We know he'll be meeting with the president on Thursday.
Yes, this visit will really be trying to tackle some of the global issues that currently are being addressed. And I think that the meeting with the president is going to be the top of the agenda item. I think that it's really going to be a chance to kind of see what is going to be next and what are some of the key components to ensure the relations continue in a strong manner.
Well, in recent months have seen a string of attacks on Israeli-connected shipping believed to have been carried out by Iran. Is there a possibility of talks on a new nuclear accord between Iran and world powers? What are you hearing?
Yes, the nuclear issue is one that President Biden came in office stating that he would need to definitely address. And we know that the nuclear war has been something in the talks for the U.S., even with the last presidential administration with former President Trump. And so we are expecting that will be at the top of the discussion because the U.S. at this time is really looking to see if there's going to be any potential terrorist issues. I mean, all that's happening with Afghanistan and across the world, it is going to be key and critical that they don't take their eyes off of Iran.
Well, let's just talk about Afghanistan there, which you mentioned. Despite the pressure on President Biden to extend the U.S. withdrawal, he said yesterday that the deadline still stands. How has this been perceived in the U.S.?
The U.S., I think, is starting to accept the fact that President Biden has moved forward with the removal of troops and American presence in Afghanistan. And so that is definitely, I think, being more accepted. The real issue is how many more individuals can they get to safety, how many more Americans to ensure that all Americans are able to make it out by August 31st. Because as we know, the Taliban has stated that they are not going to make any extensions, which I think is part of why you're hearing President Biden state that he will definitely be moving toward that August 31st deadline. So we are definitely in a position that I think Americans are beginning to really understand the full spectrum of why the president has moved in this direction.
All right, then. Thank you, Maria. Well, the U.S. and its Western allies are stepping up evacuation efforts after U.S. President Biden stuck to an August 31st deadline to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. More than 80,000 people, foreigners and Afghans, have been evacuated since August 14, the day before the Taliban swept into Kabul. Evacuations from Kabul airport in Afghanistan pick up pace, with the total number leaving since the Taliban takeover reaching 82,300. U.S. President Joe Biden says he aims to complete the operation and U.S. troop pull out by the 31st August deadline.
We agreed that we will continue to our close cooperation to get people out as efficiently and safely as possible. We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out and no disruptions to our operations. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable, should that become necessary.
Some U.S. troops have already started to leave as the efforts enter its final phase. U.S. allies have pressed President Biden to extend the time frame, but there are fears thousands of Afghans who wish to flee the Taliban may be left behind. Racing to evacuate as many as possible, the UK says the deadline for the evacuation is to the last minute of August 31st.
What we're aimed at doing, having got the capacity to get people out over the last 24 hours to 2,000, we want to just keep using every hour and day that we've got left to push through the outstanding cases of British nationals, Afghans who've worked for us, but also those high vulnerability cases if we can. We've seen achieving scholars back on those flights. We want to get journalists back on those flights, women's rights defenders. So we'll keep doing everything we can in whatever that remaining window is that we've got left.
While Germany says it will try to help those who worked with its soldiers and aid organizations and wish to leave Afghanistan even after August 31st. The Taliban has said all foreign evacuations must be completed by this date and asked the United States to stop urging talented Afghans to leave, while also trying to persuade people at the airport to go home, saying they had nothing to fear. Leaders of the Taliban, who have sought to show a more moderate face since capturing Kabul, have begun talks on forming a government that have included discussions with some old enemies, including former President Hamid Karzai. Immigration lawyer Dayal Fadino is in the UK. He joins us now for more on this. Mr. Fadino, thank you for speaking to us on the program. Thousands of people are continuing to try to flee Afghanistan following this Taliban takeover of the country. As they arrive in various countries, what should be their status?
Oh, good afternoon. The current situation on ground in Afghanistan right now is disastrous, really. We have a situation where people don't know where they're going or coming because of the fact that the Taliban has taken over. Anywhere they go at this point, if they are allowed to get into the countries they're going to, their status would be that of a refugee. And what they would then have to do is indeed apply for an asylum based on the fact that they are fleeing persecution from the Taliban. There are hundreds of thousands of Afghans who would truly really want to leave their country because of what's going on at this point. But anywhere they go at this right now, their status would be that of a refugee, an asylum seeker possibly, for political reasons.
Well, having been through such a terrible ordeal. Just talk us through the process of their resettlement, what that would look like.
Well, at this point, it's quite difficult to predict what their situation will be regarding their settlement, because first of all, there are so many Afghans at this point who really want to actually get out of Afghanistan because of the current political situation in Afghanistan. But what they would then have to do is, if they are lucky enough to actually get out, what would then happen is the international community would then have to actually come in and help and assist many of them, because we should remember that we are in this situation right now because of the fact that the Western countries withdrew from, particularly the US and the UK, withdrew from Afghanistan. What they just did was to cut and run and to abandon the Afghans to their faith. And for that reason, the international community would have to come in, assist as much as they can, because at least they owe the Afghans that moral duty to settle them anywhere they are trying to at least go to at this point. And the charitable organizations, NGOs, would also have to be involved in their settlement to be able to obtain the necessary status they would need to be able to stay in the countries they are going to. But unfortunately, it's going to be very difficult for so many of them because after the 31st of August, when the Taliban fully takes over and the Western countries have left Afghanistan, it will be difficult for so many of them to get out of the country.
Well, just finally, with this rush to get out as many as possible, how can authorities, ensure that people who are arriving in various countries are not being infiltrated by militants, and that could, pose a potential security threat?
Well, indeed, there's a possibility that there are going to be so many people infiltrating many of these countries through what's going on right now in Afghanistan. But honestly, it's a chance and a risk the Western world would have to take in terms of, trying to resettle these poor individuals. Because honestly, that responsibility to resettle these people falls on the Western world, the US and the UK. They should never actually have gone into Afghanistan in the first place. Now that this is happening, 10 years after, they decided to actually cut and run. So all the refugee crisis now, happening to hundreds of thousands of Afghans. The West actually owe that responsibility to many of them. And yes, it could pose a security threat to so many of these countries. But honestly, they should never actually have gone into that country in the first place 10 years ago. So it's their moral responsibility to take charge and to help as many of them as they can to resettle in any of the countries they decide to actually go to.
All right, then. Thank you very much, immigration lawyer Dayal Fadino.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Still ahead on the program. It's Dancing with the Tanks in Russia as ballet dancers perform Swan Lake Ballet finale on military vehicles. More in a moment. Stay with us, please. Welcome back to the program. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has met Vietnam's top leaders, offering support in several key areas, including the enhancement of its maritime security in an effort to counter Beijing's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea. Harris also offered more visits by U.S. warships during her talks with Vietnam's president, vice president, and prime minister. Speaking in Hanoi during a meeting with the Vietnamese president, Harris said there was a need to increase pressure on Beijing over its maritime claims. During the talks, Xi offered Vietnam vaccines and aid to tackle COVID-19 and also announced the launch of several programs to help combat climate change. Harris's 7-day trip to Singapore and Vietnam is part of a broader U.S. strategy to woo allies that Washington hopes will help it challenge China's growing security and economic influence in the region. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping says that China and Russia, as comprehensive strategic partners of coordination for a new era, should deepen cooperation against interference. In a phone conversation with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, Xi said the two countries should firmly keep their respective future in their own hands. Xi said all countries are faced with the arduous task of tackling the pandemic. China is ready to deepen cooperation with Russia on vaccine development and production to jointly ensure the security and stability of the global vaccine supply chain and safeguard the safety and health of peoples in both countries, contributing to the building of a global community of health for all. While referring to the current Afghan situation, Chinese president says he respects Afghanistan's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity following the policy of non-interference in Afghanistan's internal affairs and has been playing a constructive role in the political settlement of the Afghan issue. Some updates now on the COVID-19 pandemic. A U.S. intelligence report requested by President Biden into the origins of the coronavirus pandemic is inconclusive. That's according to U.S. media reports. Agencies are reportedly divided on whether the virus that was first seen in China was the result of a natural spillover from animals to humans or was caused by a laboratory accident. Well, here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 global update.
China has accused the US of politicization in its efforts to trace the origin of the coronavirus, demanding a US military lab be investigated. It comes ahead of the release of a US report intended to resolve disputes among intelligence agencies, considering different theories about how the coronavirus emerged, including a once-dismissed theory about a Chinese lab accident. In other developments, the World Health Organization says coronavirus surges, driven in part by the Delta variant, are pushing health systems of some Western Pacific countries dangerously close to a red line.
Until a few weeks ago, our region had fared comparatively well, with around 2% of global cases and deaths. But several countries in the Western Pacific are now experiencing surges, in part driven by the Delta variant. And our share of global cases and death is rising sharply.
Over 6 million people across the region have been infected with coronavirus, and over 82,000 have died, with Indonesia, the Philippines and Malaysia having the highest number of cases. Meanwhile, New Zealand has reported 62 new COVID-19 cases, taking the total number of cases in the latest outbreak to 210.
Nobody wants to be in lockdown, and the best way that we can return to enjoying the freedoms that we have had for much of the last year is to get very high levels of vaccination. So we do need to shift from things like our border restrictions and lockdown measures being our main lines of defence to vaccination being a much bigger collective defence against the virus.
In neighbouring Australia, Sydney's COVID-19 cases has risen to a new daily record as officials urge an increase in vaccinations to help curb the rate of hospitalizations that is putting severe strains on the health system. Despite 2 months of lockdowns, New South Wales State reported 919 new cases amid a growing Delta variant outbreak, taking Australia's daily case numbers to a new pandemic high just below 1,000. And finally, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris says the United States will donate 1 million Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine doses to Vietnam.
Over the past decades, we have made significant progress and now cooperate on many areas that affect people's lives. And let me start with one key announcement which can make a difference. I am delighted to announce that the United States is donating an additional 1 million Pfizer vaccines to Vietnam. And this will build on our previous donations. And these vaccines will start arriving within the next 24 hours to Vietnam.
Vietnam has fully inoculated just 2% of its 92 million people, among the lowest in Asia. The country had successfully contained the coronavirus for most of last year, but since April, it's been dealing with a sizable COVID-19 outbreak driven by the Delta variant.
The World Health Organization says nearly 1.3 billion people globally suffer from hypertension, a silent killer often driven by obesity that increases the risk of heart disease, stroke and kidney disease. In a joint study published in The Lancet, the WHO and Imperial College London says hypertension can be easily diagnosed by monitoring blood pressure and treated with low-cost drugs, but half of affected people are unaware of their condition, which is left untreated. The study also adds that while hypertension rates have changed little in 30 years, the caseload has shifted to lower-income countries as wealthy nations have brought it largely under control. Well, a brawl broke out in Armenia's parliament earlier today as lawmakers hauled objects across the floor of the house and grappled with one another. The scenes of chaos erupted after a ruling party lawmaker described some of the country's past defense ministers as traitors. Domestic political tensions have run high in Armenia since a war last year in which Azeri forces drove ethnic Armenian forces out of swaths of territory they had controlled since the 1990s in and around the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Security officers could be seen pouring onto the floor of the house to quell the disturbance. In television footage, the parliament had to call for a recess. The current parliament convened for the first time earlier this month after this summer's elections that Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's party won. And finally, Belarusian delegation at the International Army Games 2021 near Moscow surprised the audience with a ballet show with a bit of help from Russian ballet dancers. During a tank biathlon competition, 4 dancers climbed out of 2 military vehicles to perform the Swan Lake Ballet finale on their armor. Behind 2 pairs, soloists of the Moscow-based Russian Imperial Ballet, another 4 vehicles were seen demonstrating some dancing skills as well, moving and rotating to the Pyotr Tchaikovsky music. Tank biathlon is a military discipline invented by Russia's defense ministry to hone the skills of tank crews. Each year, tank teams from various countries take part in a friendly competition to determine the most skilled tank crew. And that's it on the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.